Recently, I got what I think may have been bacterial folliculitis on one of my thighs. This vlog deals with the symptoms, how I treated it, the research explaining how the treatments work, and a few other details. Let's start with the cause. It's purely speculation, but 2 days prior, I had done some unusual things that might have contributed. I had biked 15 miles that day, sweating like mad in 90-degree weather, slathered in sunscreen, and then stood around for a good 6 hours in a dusty garage full of about 200 people sweating and working out. This was for an EMS training session through the FDNY. I showered first thing when I got home, but whatever went down, something contributed to making the environment on my leg perfect for bacterial proliferation. I first noticed the infection at 11 a.m. Monday morning. I knew it was an acute infection and not my regular low-level presentation of a couple irritated follicles because the area was much larger than usual and also redder. Also, it was itchy and it felt warm. It felt like there was some metabolic action happening there that my own body was not creating. As you will see, it progressed from flat red bumps to raised pimple-like bumps later that night. It was about 8 hours before I could get home and start treating it, so it went unchecked for that time, and the change impressed me as fast and not to be ignored. I'm going to start showing some pictures now, so if you feel uneasy seeing skin infections, this is the time to stop or look away. I apologize for the variations in lighting. I'm totally a beginner when it comes to photographing skin infections, so I unnecessarily switched between warm and cold lighting, not knowing how that would affect my presentation now. Live and learn. This first picture is from Monday at 11 a.m. To my eye, the bumps look mostly flat and red. It's still rather calm. There's a little cluster in the center having poorly defined borders that kind of fade into each other. If you look at the bottom of the picture, the medial aspect of my thigh, you'll see no more than about a half dozen lesions that are starting to develop white heads. This second picture is from about 8 p.m. that evening. You'll notice at the bottom of the picture, the number of raised lesions with white heads has multiplied noticeably, and they've also started to appear more prominently in the center, and the borders are a little clearer. This is change in the wrong direction for sure. Now, the whole thing cleared up, so don't worry. But at this point, I want to state very clearly that in treating myself at home, I was taking a huge chance, and I do not want any of you to try to treat something like this at home yourselves. See a doctor. I had the right tools to heal this, but where extraordinary luck came into play was in the diagnosis. I really had no idea what I was dealing with, whether it was bacterial or viral or fungal, and that is a very dangerous game to play with your safety. Had the infection progressed to my muscle tissue or to my blood, I might have lost a limb or I might have died. It does happen to people. Do not attempt to treat an infection on your own. See a doctor. I gave myself 3 hours to feel improvement. The itching was constant, so that impressed me as a good way to measure. And I decided that if that symptom did not start to feel better or if it got worse, I would go to urgent care and get on a treatment plan with a Western medical doctor. It did feel better within that time and no worse, so I gave it until the next morning. The next morning it felt fine, no worse. I still hadn't looked at it. I was leaving the bandage on, also probably not the smartest decision. I probably should have taken the bandage off, washed it, looked at it, and then reapplied the Notoginseng and the bandage. Anyway, at the end of that night, night number 2, the skin was clearly healing and the redness was somewhat more diffuse, the white head starting to reduce in number, and my skin feeling overall calmer and less itchy. Luckily for me, everything lined up and I'm fine. Here are the points I want to make as a result of this experience. Traditional medicines are meant to help us with this exact kind of thing. As I mentioned, having an accurate diagnosis that can only be made by someone experienced in seeing, diagnosing, and treating skin infections. And second, I thought it would be interesting to explore what the research says about each of these therapies: Notoginseng powder, pulsing blue light, acupuncture, and Moxa, also called Acu Moxa. I'm going to first get into a discussion on how each of these therapies works, what the science says each of them does to microbes, and hence how they help us fight infection and to heal. That's going to be a little science heavy, so if you want to skip that, go to the section labeled Treatment Protocol, How I Treated Myself. Let's talk about how Notoginseng and Yunnan Paiyao work and the differences and similarities between those. So Yunnan Paiyao is the name of a traditional Chinese medicine formula which contains, Notoginseng and a few other herbs. Notoginseng is the one I'm really interested in here, and I'm using the formula name Yunnan Paiyao and the name of that single herb, Notoginseng, interchangeably. And for infection and wound healing, that may be fine, but if you take the herbs internally, the effects and therefore the cautions and contraindications, etc., will be different. But for my purposes of applying it externally, it's all the same. They're both the same. In fact, I've used powdered pure Notoginseng for wound and infection healing, and so far I cannot discern a difference between Yunnan Paiyao powder applied to the skin and Notoginseng powder applied to the skin. It is important that you understand what these names mean, however, for your applications at home. Also, the spelling of Notoginseng can be 2 words or it can be 1 word, and I will use those interchangeably here as well. Specifically to stop bleeding or to prevent or stop infections, using either Yunnan Paiyao or Notoginseng is fine. You can get Notoginseng on Amazon, but you can't get Yunnan Paiyao through Amazon. Affiliate links will follow. Thank you. But if you go to Chinatown or any Asian supermarket that also has a small pharmacy in it, you will find Yunnan Paiyao powder and capsules and maybe Notoginseng powders, but maybe not, because most people who need Notoginseng to stop bleeding or to prevent infection as a routine, like medicine cabinet level supply item, are only looking for Yunnan Paiyao because that's what's familiar to them. They don't look for Notoginseng. Hence, supply and demand will determine whether you find Notoginseng powder or whether you find a Yunnan Paiyao powder at your local. As of the recording of this video, I am looking for an affiliate program through a company that anyone can use to order Yunnan Paiyao through. It is a little difficult to find because it's a Chinese medicine formula, so some places won't sell it to the layperson and some places will. It just depends on who's running the store. Please check the description or the show notes for that. But as of now, if you want Yunnan Paiyao and you don't have a Chinese or Asian herbal pharmacy close by, just order it online from wherever you can find it. And if you can't get Yunnan Paiyao for external purposes only, for cuts and to stop infections, get the powdered Notoginseng. Yunnan Paiyao means the white medicine from Yunnan province. This medicine is famous. As I've said, its chief ingredient is Notoginseng, which currently makes up a market of about $700 million US per year across China, Korea, the US, Canada, and Vietnam. In fact, the last Notoginseng powder I ordered through Amazon came from Wisconsin, grown out there by a father and son. Affiliate link available in the show notes. Yunnan Paiyao is traditionally known for its ability to stop bleeding, although in the last few decades it has been used and researched in a number of modern disease treatment settings, including cancer, Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's, brain repair, and longevity, infections, cardiovascular health, and athletic recovery, to name just a few. Pretty exciting stuff. If you read the reviews on Amazon, however, for any Notoginseng powder or capsule product, you will see most people using it to support their cardiovascular health or to support their athletic recovery. Like all plants, Notoginseng has dozens of compounds that can be enhanced or weakened depending on how it's processed or how it's taken, i.e. dried and powdered versus steamed and then dried and powdered, or decocted in water versus decocted in alcohol, and then swallowed and processed through the liver, versus applied topically to the skin to treat a wound or an infection, or both. Its blood-moving properties make it highly sought after for injury healing, including cerebrovascular accidents, cardiovascular health, wound healing, and, as we mentioned, athletic recovery. Applied topically, Notoginseng stops bleeding and also quickens the blood circulation. Obviously, stopping bleeding is one function, but the blood-moving aspect of Notoginseng is critical because it allows us to heal more rapidly from lacerations, cuts, scrapes, you get the idea. It also stops infections, which is always a concern when the skin is open. Notoginseng is being studied for its ability to destroy certain kinds of cancerous tumors and for its anti-brain aging properties in Parkinson's and Alzheimer's because it is neuroregenerative. Its botanical and pharmaceutical name, Panax Notoginseng, comes from the Greek words pana, meaning all, and axos, meaning cure, cures all. These are the same words that make up the name Panacea, originally one of the two daughters of the Greek father of medicine, Asclepius, from whom we get the word itself. The name of Asclepius's second child was Hygienia. Together, Panacea and Hygienia made an important and powerful pair who, in working with their father, served the newly created humans in both curing their ills and in teaching them, the humans, how to prevent disease. So, when Europeans began to explore and catalog the Chinese pharmacopoeia, Notoginseng was deemed to be such a heavy hitter that it was named after one of the daughters of the Greek father of medicine. Notoginseng is incredibly effective at stopping infections. In research, it has been shown to stop MRSA, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, fungi, viruses, and many other nasties. Coming up, we'll get into what some of the research says about Notoginseng, but before we get into the data, I want to mention that the ginseng family consists of 4 species, and the studies I reference here often use the terms ginseng and Notoginseng interchangeably. When they need to make distinctions, the authors do so in the beginning of the article. All my references are at the end of this article or in the show notes or descriptions. So the research shows very clearly that Notoginseng affects 4 or 5 aspects of bacteria as well as viruses. And Notoginseng also affects us in ways that are beneficial. These are quorum sensing ability, biofilm, the cell membrane, and the DNA of the bacteria. Notoginseng also fine-tunes or enhances our immunity to be more sensitive to the bacteria. We're going to get into each of these now. Quorum sensing ability is what allows the bacteria to communicate with each other. It goes hand in hand with something else Notoginseng disrupts, which is called microbial motility. That is the bacteria's ability to move around. Both motility and quorum sensing are essential for bacteria to coordinate, to protect the colony, and to spread. And it depends on the next item, which is biofilm. Notoginseng destroys mature biofilm and prevents new biofilm from being formed. This is big because biofilm is like both a root system and a protective shield made of toxic bacterial slime. Bacteria depend on biofilm to make their environment hospitable so they can proliferate and destroy our healthy tissues. Biofilm is also one of the main defenses bacteria use to build and maintain defenses against antibiotics, which is why Notoginseng is so effective against MRSA, either alone or in combination with antibiotics. It gets the biofilm defense out of the way so the bacteria can be more effectively killed by the herb or by antibiotics. If you search the web for biofilm right now, you will find it is a major focus of biohackers and by those with the wherewithal to take their healing into their own hands. Good job, guys. Now, the bacterial cell membrane, also called the lipid bilayer, is lysed or split by Notoginseng. This results in the formation of pores or open leakage of the cell organelles and the nutrients, and eventually cell death if not repaired in time. Basically, it cuts open and eviscerates the bacteria. Regarding immunity and inflammation, Notoginseng strengthens the immune system while reducing inflammation. When applied locally, it has a local anti-inflammatory effect. When taken internally, it increases the immune response systemically and reduces inflammation throughout the whole body. Research on combining Notoginseng with antibiotics shows an increase in effectiveness against resistant strains and an increase in recovery and survival rates compared to those who receive antibiotics only. This last aspect makes Notoginseng unique and valuable in breaking through the antibiotic resistance of certain microbes and making our immune response more targeted. About bacterial DNA, this is really interesting. Notoginseng damages bacterial DNA, as well as viral RNA and viral DNA in many ways that are beyond my scope to discuss adequately. But the take-home message is that Notoginseng or Yunnan Paiyao make it impossible for the pathogen to function or reproduce correctly. There's no concern, evidence, or reporting of interfering with our healthy DNA. These actions are so well established that in the scientific community, they are considered facts. Let's talk about how pulsing blue light works on infections. Pulsed or pulsing blue light, PBL for short, has strong and well-documented antimicrobial properties. The pulsed in PBL is just what it sounds like. It's when blue light is delivered with an on-off pulsing pattern rather than a steady delivery where the light stays on constantly. The pulsing enhances the effect, and in a minute we'll get a few clues as to why. In a 2001 study published in the Journal of Photochemistry and Photobiology, which I will link to, PBL was found to have some powerful effects on bacteria and viruses. I was surprised, and you may be too, to find out that just applying a blue light that pulses disrupts bacterial biofilm formation. Again, that's the film that microbes secrete so that they can stick together and form colonies and resist the attack of antibiotics, which in turn facilitates communicating with each other and even sharing genetic material, all essential to bacterial proliferation, adaptation, and reproduction. Pulsing blue light breaks down the cell membranes of bacteria and viruses. It does this by causing a rapid change in the polarity of the cell membrane. That's the charge of the cell membrane, which is basically made of fatty molecules surrounded by water. And as you can imagine, the integrity of the membrane depends on a delicate balance of positive and negative charges along the inside and the outside of the cell, which in turn hold the components of the cell membrane where they should be. Pulsing blue light depolarizes the membrane, making it go haywire and starting to split open. This allows the insides of the bacteria to spill out. Obviously, the microbes will die if they can't repair the membrane quickly enough, which is why I think the pulsing may be important. I imagine the pulsing reintroduces the stimulus of the blue light over and over again, kind of like a relentless rapid fire, rather than a missile. There's also a chemical thing that happens where the bacteria needs to discharge and recharge its receptivity to the blue light. So I imagine the pulsing allows the bacteria to do that cycle, which in turn makes it more susceptible to damage than if the light were steady. In viruses, pulsing blue light causes the same cell membrane depolarization as in bacteria, resulting in the disruption of what's called the viral capsid. Pulsing blue light also fragments viral nucleic acids or damages the genes in the virus. Since nucleic acids make up all the genetic material viruses need to successfully replicate, pulsing blue light stops that process of replication. Thus, PBL is being used for a host of viruses including herpes, COVID, HIV, and many others. I couldn't find any statements that said pulsing blue light was being used to eliminate COVID-19, but the photochemistry study does state, quote, enveloped viruses like SARS-CoV-2, which is responsible for COVID-19, have been shown to be more susceptible to photodestruction than non-enveloped viruses. Photodestruction refers to pulsing blue light. The whole article is about pulsing blue light. You'll no doubt notice that pulsing blue light and notoginseng have a few important mechanisms in common. My thinking is that this leads to a summation effect or an enhancing of the therapeutic effects that they share. By the way, I've used teeny and cheap blue light pens and blue light devices at home for years to kill the herpes virus in the form of cold sores or canker sores, and the healing time is noticeably shorter. Look for the affiliate links. Let's talk about how Moxa works for infections and immunity. Moxa is one of my favorite tools. There are a ton of good quality studies out there on the effects of Moxa, on increasing immunity and lowering inflammation, but not so many on reducing infections. Moxa has been shown to increase white blood cell count, to increase dopamine, and in every significant study, it has shown stellar ability to improve inflammatory markers. This is useful for patients recovering from cancer, Parkinsons, and autoimmune diseases, to name only a few. And when trying to clear an infection, reducing inflammation is a necessary and powerful first step because it allows the immune system to overcome the infection. And that's mainly what I used it for, to reduce inflammation, to increase white blood cell count, and to thereby heighten my immune response. One of the most well-known studies on Moxa and infectious diseases found that Moxa was effective at shortening the duration of tuberculosis infection and in decreasing the infectivity, or how infectious a person is, as decided by testing their lung sputum for Mycobacterium tuberculosis. This was the famous Moxa Africa study, which followed 180 newly diagnosed tuberculosis patients in Uganda. You can find that study online at moxafrica.com. But for specific mechanisms such as biofilm disruption or unraveling the pathogen cell membrane, I didn't find any good research on that for Moxa. And I can see why. I mean, imagine trying to get a hospital admin to approve the use of a smoky herb around tuberculosis patients. And the nature of Moxa itself prevents us from blinding or double blinding patients and practitioners. I mean, you can smell and see if it's the real thing or not. And then there is the ethical or the moral question of holding back life-saving therapies. I mean, if you know somebody has tuberculosis or influenza and you don't medicate them, if instead you give the meds to only one group and use Moxa by itself on the other group, sure, that would give you clear results, but at what cost to the poor patient who needs to survive? In Japan, Moxa therapist was an actual occupation alongside acupuncturist or herbalist or shiatsu therapist, and people will do Moxa at home if instructed to do so in Japan or in Asia. But outside of that region of the world, the earning potential for Moxa is minuscule, and the patient compliance for something foreign that looks esoteric is pretty low. Also, hospitals, cancer centers, and drug companies stand to make no money from Moxa or Moxa research. If anything, they're going to lose money as a result. So for these financial and cultural considerations, Moxa just hasn't caught on to the degree that herbal medicine or acupuncture has, which is why there is not as much research on it. But of the studies that we do have, the positive effects on the immune system and inflammation are clear. And Moxa does some pretty incredible things in other body systems. It's both neuroregenerative and neuroprotective. It protects brain cells and it helps them to regrow and regenerate. There was one study that found that Moxa used in combination with zinc oxide disrupted biofilm of pathogenic fungi, but zinc oxide is well documented as a biofilm disruptor anyway, so I have trouble looking at those results and pointing to Moxa as the key player because I just couldn't tell from the excerpt of that study, from the abstract of that study. That having been said, the anecdotal evidence on which much of Asian medicine has been built for thousands of years is clear. Tuberculosis outbreaks in Japan, plummeting white blood cell count in cancer patients, prevention of recurrence of breast cancers, shrinking of tumors, shrinking of swollen glands like the liver, pancreas, thyroid, etc., even the reduction of mild fevers. Moxa works. And if you have the commitment to tolerate the inevitable burns that are necessary in learning the craft, you definitely should learn it for yourself. Listen to me on that last part. If you do Moxa, you're going to get burned, your patient is going to get burned, and you have to accept that inevitability as a patient or provider or practitioner or as someone who provides care at home until your skills are dope enough to prevent frequent burns. And even then, you're still going to have the occasional burn for your patient or for yourself. Hopefully mild as you get more experience. But I knew it was worth it in spite of the risk of burns, so I Moxa'd and continue to Moxa myself daily. Now the queen. Acupuncture. Acupuncture is remarkably adaptogenic. It increases or decreases immune activity according to what the body needs at the time. It actually modulates immune activity. In research studies, for example, acupuncture lowered the body's immune response in autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, but acupuncture increased the immune response in diseases such as cancer, which rely on suppressing the body's immune response for the cancer cells to survive. Acupuncture also modulates blood flow. It increases blood flow and oxygen concentration in the body, even in areas where the needles are not inserted, which is wild. These specific effects are also found to happen not while the needles are in, but within 40 minutes after the needles are taken out, which is pretty cool and interesting to think that the body is reacting to instructions given by the needle process, which is one of the primary ways traditionalists have understood how acupuncture works. One study on acupuncture and acute pharyngitis, an infection of the throat that can be viral or bacterial, found acupuncture alone to be more effective than antibiotics. I would need to really read this study closely to understand it beyond that result or conclusion that the authors draw, but for now I want to both hold up acupuncture as a means of enhancing the immune system's response to infections, and also to clearly recommend that you never substitute acupuncture for Western pharmaceuticals if you have an infection anywhere. Thank you for hanging in there with me. I know that all the science can be pretty dry and maybe sometimes boring, especially for non-practitioners. Now on to the protocol, how I treated myself. So every night for about half an hour, I would do pulsing blue light, and while that was doing its thing, I would needle and Moxa my stomach 36. After those 3 therapies were finished, I'd apply the Yunnan Paiyao and leave it overnight. The next night, I'd remove the Yunnan Paiyao, wash it with soap and water, let my leg air dry, and then go for another round of pulsing blue light and Acu Moxa. And that was it. About an hour of work every night, and I was golden, or lucky, or dumb and lucky. Don't try this yourself. Okay, I'm going to talk about the points that I chose. While the blue light was on, I would insert acupuncture needles into the stomach 36 Zusanli point. That's the point on the tibialis anterior muscle. And that's one of the most widely studied acupuncture points for immune function. And that point is almost always my first choice when I want to modulate my immune system for anything. For the Moxa, I use these little Moxa rolls over the handle of the needle. They come pre-cut. I drill a hole using an acupuncture needle or a small nail, like a finishing nail. I would ignite 3 to 6 rounds of Moxa, and this took a total of about 30 minutes or less. By the way, there are many forms of Moxa. This one is called needle Moxa or Kyutoshin in Japanese. And I chose it because it's one of the lower maintenance, warmer, and smokier forms of administering Moxa. So I don't have to watch it constantly. I found the risk of burning to be pretty low. It stays hot for a long time, and there's a ton of smoke, which I think is therapeutic because the smoke carries the properties of the oils and the herb. I also experimented with a few other forms of Moxa, which again depended on practical factors. If I didn't, it's really extremely hot here, so we prefer to have the windows closed and the AC on. But when I'm doing Moxa, I open the windows, I turn the AC off, and I run these air purifiers. I have 3 of them at full blast for a couple hours. Then I close the windows and turn the AC on, and all that all together is like kind of a pain in the ass, but it's the price that you pay for helping yourself, and it's a price worth paying in my opinion. But some days I would do a form of Moxa that was a little smokier. Some days I would do a form of Moxa that was a little less smoky. I would use these little stick-on like Moxa cylinders, and these have become one of my go-tos because they generate a lot of smoke, but the smoke makes direct contact with the skin. It doesn't go, some on the skin and then some floating up into the air the way that Kyutoshin does. And I also did some indirect Moxa, which is like rolled up Moxa punk or Moxa wool that I would put over top a piece of ginger that I perforated with a fork, slice of ginger perforated with a fork, and I also did what's called a Moxa box, which is where you take a smoky, like hella smoky form of Moxa, like a Moxa stick, Moxa roll. It's thick like a cigar, and you cut off about a 1 or 2 inch piece. You light the piece, and then you toss it in the box. The box has wire mesh in the bottom of it, but other than the wire mesh, that's the only thing between the herb that's burning and your skin. So the box has a top on it and a couple holes on the sides so air can go in and out, and all that smoke just drifts down onto your skin, and there's like a thick resin on your skin after you use that thing, man. It's awesome. So if I wanted to do the Moxa box, that was like a real commitment. But if I wanted less smoke, I would use that stick-on Moxa. But I tried to use, for the most part, the needle Moxa or the Kyutoshin, just to like be consistent. But I'd say the 2 forms of Moxa that I favored this time were the stick-on Moxa and the Kyutoshin, with some ginger Moxa and some Moxa box thrown in. So that's the needles, and then that's the Moxa. Now the Yunnan Paiyao. Okay, Yunnan Paiyao Notoginseng powder. It is a real pain to deal with. Well, I shouldn't say that because I don't want to dissuade anybody. It's not really a pain. You just have to know how to make it easy for yourself. For a large area, like an infection, like what I was treating, I created an 8-inch by 8-inch bandage by taking a bunch of 4-inch square, 4-inch by 4-inch bandages and putting them together. And then I would tape the seams. So I would make kind of a plus or a cross shape down the middle. Then once those seams were taped, I would turn it over. Yeah, the contact surface would start out on my table, my dining room table, but I would wipe down and clean the table first. However, I don't worry too much about the sterility of the bandages. I try to make sure that everything is clean, but I don't bother making sure that things are sterile because that's what the Yunnan Paiyao is for. That's what the Notoginseng does. It sterilizes and it stops infections. So I would turn it over, which would expose the contact surface of the 8-inch by 8-inch bandage. I'd take a spray bottle with water, again, non-sterile. I would just do like light sprays to get the surface mostly wet. It's okay if this stuff is not distributed smoothly. It can be a little clumpy, like clumped in spots. It's fine as long as for an infection on the skin, as long as you get most of the area. That proved for me to be sufficient. So I would sprinkle the Yunnan Paiyao or the Notoginseng on. If I was using Yunnan Paiyao in the vials, I would just open up the vial and tap it to get it out, going in a circle. If I was using the capsules, I had to like twist open the capsules and then sprinkle it out. If I was using the Notoginseng powder, I would just get like a little measuring spoon, a 1/4 inch or an 1/8 inch measuring spoon, and scoop it out, and then tap the measuring spoon so that I'd sprinkle it all over the bandage. Then I'd take the bandage and quickly, efficiently turn it over and place it onto the infected area, press it down to make sure that there was plenty of contact, and then I would put tape around the perimeter. And I did that like big bandage version for 3 nights, and I stopped the Notoginseng Yunnan Paiyao for about 2 days. So this takes us up to about day 6. So around day 6, I started to feel like the progress of clearing was slowing down. I just wanted to make sure that no bacteria was going to proliferate and come back later. Because if that happened, that would be even more dangerous than the original infection, because the bacteria that come back are the ones who are the toughest. Again, I shouldn't have been messing with any of this to begin with, but really this is what the medicine is for, and I took full responsibility, and luckily I'm walking away with it. So the second way that I applied Yunnan Paiyao was just to leave it on for half an hour at a time and then wash it off. First, I would take the spray bottle of water and I would spray my thigh. And again, I'm not trying to get everything evenly, smoothly distributed. Just so long as the majority of the skin is covered, I'm happy. So I'd spray it a couple times, and then I would open up one of the Yunnan Paiyao capsules or scoop out some of the Notoginseng from the bag, and then I would sprinkle that on my thigh, taking care to use my hand on the outside and inside edges of my thigh, simply to keep the powder from falling onto the floor. The powder is very fine, very light, so the slightest breeze or the slightest exhale will blow it all over the place, right? And once you get it on your floor, you have to wait for it to settle, and then you have to mop it up. You can't vacuum it up because it's fine. It's just a little bit sticky, so you got to use a kitchen sponge. And that was a lot easier to deal with than bandaging it. That allowed me just to apply the Notoginseng Yunnan Paiyao powder and get the benefits of it for about half an hour and then wash it off, and that was sufficient starting on day 6 or so. I wouldn't have done it that way days 1 through 3. So now the results. Okay, so after 3 nights, the infection had calmed down enough that I thought my body could heal the rest of the way without using any of the Yunnan Paiyao powder. And day 6, I thought, I need the reassurance of going back to the Yunnan Paiyao powder and applying it at least half an hour a night, taking us up to day 8 when it was almost the same as the other leg. was almost completely cleared. And then after day 8, I continued to use needle Moxa and blue light. The reason I'm still doing the blue light and the needle Moxa is for the reassurance to make sure that the infection does not come back. I just want to make absolutely sure. I don't know where this thing came from. I just want to make sure it doesn't come back. And I'm also taking care to avoid most added sugar. I am eating some dark chocolate, which is lower in sugar than milk chocolate. And I'm eating really high fiber, lots of chia, lots of flax, oats, sweet potatoes, whole grain breads made at home. I'm eating like at least half of each meal is cooked vegetables, because I want to make sure that I'm eating as many vegetables and as much fiber as possible so that I can replenish and tend to my gut microbiome, which has a strong relationship with the skin microbiome. Obviously, the microbiome on my skin is off, so I want to try to restore that as thoroughly as possible. By the way, the research on Moxa proves that it's wiser to prevent disease by doing Moxa regularly than to only use Moxa as a treatment once someone is sick. In one study I read, for example, mice were injected with the staph bacteria. One group had acupuncture and Moxa before and after being injected, while the second group had acupuncture and Moxa only after being injected with staph, not before. The group who received Acu-Moxa before being infected with staph bacteria recovered faster, and fewer of them died compared to their counterparts who only had the Acu and Moxa after they had staph. I hate animal studies, by the way, but this makes a really important point that using acupuncture and Moxa as preventative medicine is the wiser and more effective choice. And by the way, this is actually how the ancestors in Chinese medicine intended that Moxa be used. They said it's more effective to prevent illness than it is to treat someone who is already sick, meaning you're less likely to die from being sick if you've done a little Moxa on yourself beforehand, which is why I do it on the reg. Thank you very much for your time and your attention. I hope you found this presentation to be interesting. If you liked my content and you want more like this, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. If you want to sign up for my newsletter, that would help me tremendously, and you'll get this content first. You can find my newsletter at kimsooacu.com, KIMSOOAcu.com. Thanks again. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. I don't know what that is, like the size of a small Nerf football or something. What the hell am I saying?